Bear Grylls, Chapter 28. One of the very strong memories for me from growing up on the island was reading my school reports and opening my exam results. I would always grab the official letter before anyone could open it accidentally before me, and I would sprint down to the end of our garden where there was this gorgeous big sycamore tree. It had amazing limbs, perfectly spaced for monkey-style climbing. Over the years, I got it down to a fine art, being able to reach the highest limbs of this tree in a matter of seconds, and from there I would have a commanding view over the whole village. None of my friends ever went to the very top of this tree with me, as it always began to sway and wobble precariously as you reached the very last few branches. But I loved that part. Opening the reports or exam results up here meant that whatever the outcome, I had time and space to keep things in perspective. Okay, so I flunked another maths exam, and the Latin teacher says I must stop sniggering like a puppy in class, but from up here the world looks pretty all right. By the time I came down, I'd be ready to face the music. I never had anything to fear, though, from Mum and Dad when it came to school reports. The reports weren't ever all bad, but they definitely weren't ever all good. But Mum and Dad just loved me regardless, and this has helped me so much in my life, to have the confidence to just be myself and to go for things. I have never minded risking failure because I was never punished for failing. Life was about the journey and the fun and adventure along the way. It was never just about the destination, such as getting perfect exam results or making the top team. Dad has always been pretty hopeless at sports and academia, yet he had done well and was greatly loved, so that was good enough for me. He would always say that what really matters in life is to follow your dreams and to look after your friends and family along the way. That was life in a nutshell for him, and I so hope to pass that on to my boys as they grow up. On that note, I would slip the school reports into the bin and get a big hug. The other final memory from growing up on the island is of going on a monster run one day and getting very bad groin rub on the last mile towards home. I had endured the rubbing for the previous 8 miles, but it was now becoming agony. No one was around, the village was deserted. It was a warm summer's evening, so I took off my shorts and continued the final leg of the run naked. No sooner had I run 100 metres than I heard a police siren right behind me. I could not believe it. I mean, in all my life growing up on the island, I had never even seen a police car. There was a station in the village, but it was always just sat empty, acting only as a staging post if ever needed, and it certainly didn't have its own police car. The nearest permanent station was 30 minutes away. This was bad luck in the extreme. The car pulled me over and the officer told me to get in the back, sharpish. I jumped in, tried to explain, but was told to be quiet. I was nicked. I did eventually make it home after doing some serious explaining that I was not a streaker or a pervert. I even showed them my blood-red groin rub as proof. Finally, they let me off with a caution. So there you have it. I've been arrested for nudity, flunked my exams and failed at getting a girlfriend, but I had a hunger for adventure and the love of a great family in my soul. I was as ready as I could ever be for my entrance into the big bad world. Chapter 29. My first summer after leaving school, I realised that my priority, if I was to get to travel and adventure and see something of the world, was to earn some money. I had always been encouraged to be an entrepreneur from when I was very young, whether it was getting paid to do a paper round in the Isle of Wight or trying to sell homebrewed cider from apple juice at school. Great recipe. Thanks, Watty. So I set out to make a buck, selling my mother's water filters door to door. It was hard, thankless work, but I found that a sufficient number of my parents' friends were encouraging enough to at least to give me half an hour of their time to demonstrate the benefits of non-chlorinated water. Ill-fitting tap attachments that squirted water over many an immaculate kitchen cost me a considerable amount of my profits, but I persevered, and over a summer I managed to earn enough money to get a ticket to go interrailing around Europe. I slept on trains and explored many of the European cities, but I soon got quite depressed by the traffic and noise of one city after another. In Berlin, not wanting to carry my heavy backpack into the city centre after dark, I had hidden my belongings into a row of dustbins whilst I went for an explore. Upon returning, I found a tramp huddled over in the dark, rifling through my bags. I shouted at him and ran towards both my pack and him. At this point, he pulled out the diving knife that I had in my bag and started brandishing it at me wildly. Luckily, he was far too drunk to be able to use the knife, and I managed to disarm him and recover it in one relatively tiny move. But the fear and adrenaline of the situation then hit me, and I grabbed my pack and just ran. That was the final straw for me. I had had it with grey northern European cities and sleeping on train station platforms. I reckoned it was time to hit the beach. I asked around for where the best beach resort in Europe was, accessible by train, and the name Saint-Tropez kept coming up. Perfect. Saint-Tropez is a small French town renowned in the beach as the beach hangout for the rich and famous on the southern coast of France. At this stage, I was definitely not rich. In fact, I was getting poorer by the day now, and was definitely not famous. But undeterred, I headed south and instantly felt better. As I pulled into town, the grey of Berlin felt a million miles away. My funds, though, were now running severely low, and I soon discovered that Saint-Tropez was not the place to find cheap lodgings, but I was determined that this was the place to hang out for the last week until I headed home again. I found a quiet back street running behind the town's church bell tower. I glanced up. A solid-looking drainpipe ran up to the first level of roofing, and from there a lightning conductor ran straight up the vertical wall to the bell tower itself. How I love lightning conductors. I checked that no one was watching, then steadily shimmied up the drainpipe and the lightning conductor, before wriggling into the bell tower itself, some 100 feet up, high above the town. It was the perfect campsite. I had a spectacular view over the coastline and could watch and listen to the hustle and bustle of the seaside restaurants below. There was just enough room to lie down, and I carefully unpacked and made the 8 foot by 8 foot concrete space my new home. The 2 flaws in my plan were, first of all, the many pigeons that had also made the bell tower their dwelling, and secondly, the bell that rang every hour, 2 inches from my head. The former I just had to live with. In fact, I thought I could at least find dinner easily in the form of a pigeon if my money completely ran out. But the latter, the tolling of the bells, became unbearable. At 3 a.m. on the first night, with the help of my torch, I found the fuse box of the automatic bell and put a temporary end to the town's clock, and from then on slept like a baby. By day I swam for hours around the beautiful bays and along the beaches, and I then wandered aimlessly through the small streets and drank tea in cafes. It was heaven. But soon my funds really did run out, and I kind of knew that it was time to head back to the UK. I had promised I would first join my good friend Stan on a road trip to Romania to help a small church build an orphanage there. Romania was a firmly Eastern European country at that stage, and poverty was both widespread and visible. The mission was life-changing for me in many ways, and was such an eye-opener to how fortunate we are in the UK. We were welcomed as brothers into the home of members of the church, and by day we helped physically build the orphanage. We laid bricks and shifted sand, and in the evenings we helped with the local outreach events to support the small church. This was mainly geared at helping and welcoming in the local gypsies, who were treated as outcasts by most of the resident population. I learnt during this trip that I had no right ever to grumble at my own circumstances, and that I should always try to be grateful and hospitable wherever I can. Above all, I will always remember the kindness and warmth I was shown from those who had so little. I have since witnessed so much of this generosity and kindness from people all over the world, and it never fails to bring me up short. It tends to shine a light on my own, all too often, self-inflated ego, guilty as charged. Chapter 30. One of my closest friends in my life is someone I met age 16, and we just kind of always got on. Charlie Maxey is a good few years older than me, but you would never have known it from the antics we got up to. During this first year after school, when I rented a small room in my sister's flat, Charlie and I hung out a lot together in London. We endlessly messed about, hanging upside down at the local park's monkey bars, making giant bacon, avocado and tomato sandwiches and devouring Ribena juice cartons by the multitude, in an effort to win the £5,000 prize you got if you happened to drink the carton that contained the magic Harry the Lion toy inside. And that has kind of been our friendship ever since. He is godfather to my first son, Jesse, and he was the best man at Shara and my wedding. I'm still waiting to be his. Come on, girls, get with the programme. He is a serious catch. Charlie helped me at a very formative age to understand that there are no prizes for taking either yourself or life too seriously, and that life should be lived freely. Charlie was the first buddy I met who really lived the way I enjoyed. He also wore messy clothes, slept outside a lot, laughed at ridiculous things, and hung upside down in trees. Not much has changed really over the years. We both have maybe a few more grey hairs, and I hope we have both behaved marginally better. But through it all, our friendship has grown stronger as we have both been rolled and rocked by the boat of life. Old friends are wonderful, aren't they? There is nothing to explain. I recently asked Charlie to try and remember some of his favourite stories from that year after school we spent together, and they vary from the sublime to the very ridiculous. Like the time we built our own circus trapeze swing in the garden, and I hung my legs upside down and then had the rope snap, dropping me down right on my head from quite some height. Charlie said he heard the loud crack of vertebrae crumpling and was certain I was dead, but somehow I walked away from it. Then there was the day we both raided my sister Lara's very expensive Dead Sea mud pack that she had bought several years earlier, but had never been able to bring herself to use. We covered ourselves head to toe in this gloop and fell asleep on the grass, waking with a start when she came back, red with rage. Charlie and I would find giant hedges in London parks and repeatedly leap into them from high branches of trees, using them as natural crash mats. We dressed up in gorilla suits and sat on the rocks that overlooked a central London park cafe, mainly frequented by the local old folk. Their faces were priceless. I also remember managing successfully to push both Charlie's knees through the railings of that same lakeside cafe and then leaving him there to repay for some other gag he had played on me. He tried everything to get free, from olive oil to being pulled and manipulated by passers-by, and it was only as the cafe was calling the fire brigade that I relented and managed to prize him free. Together, we climbed across the giant River Thames by crossing under rather than on top of one of the big bridges. It was exciting climbing and brilliant fun until Charlie's car and house keys fell out of his pockets into the river. We even fell through the ice of a frozen lake together in Ireland one New Year, barely making it out alive. The girls we were with soothed our wounds with hot drinks and warm blankets for hours afterwards, and we milked their sympathy for days. The list goes on, and I am proud to say it continues today. He is still one of my most lovely, loyal and fun friends, and I am so grateful for that friendship. Oh, and by the way, he is the most insanely talented artist on the planet and makes an incredible living touching people's lives through art. I thought I should mention that. Anyway, I had one more trip planned for my year out, and after that I decided I should probably reluctantly go to university. But first I needed some more money. I tried being a barman but was fired for being scruffy, and then finally Ed, one of my old school friends, said, "Why didn't I start some self-defence classes in London and make them exclusive to girls?" It was an inspired idea. I had some flyers printed and persuaded a few health clubs to allow me to run classes in their aerobic studios. I loved it from the very start, although, sadly, the clubs dissuaded me from making the classes exclusively for girls. Invariably, I would get the occasional macho lad who would turn up determined to prove to everyone how tough they were. Luckily, these types never lasted long, as I basically taught the ethos of minimal force and the art of using an aggressor's force against himself. The machos soon got bored of this passivity. On the whole, the folk who signed up were committed, well-meaning people who just wanted to learn how to defend themselves if they were ever in a tough spot. Soon the number of clubs I taught was growing, and I was beginning to earn some half-decent money, but it had always been a means to an end, the end being to travel. It was time to move on. I felt a bit guilty when I stopped teaching the classes, as the regulars were so much fun, but I made sure I handed the clubs on to other good instructors I knew. I had loved the camaraderie of it all, but I had bigger dreams that I wanted to follow. Chapter 31. I soon had enough money saved to take my old school friend Watty up on his offer of travelling through northern India together, hiking and exploring. His family knew a retired Indian Army officer who wanted to start a trekking company for young school leavers, and we were to be his English guinea pigs, upon whom he could test various different treks and adventures. It was a dream opportunity. We spent a month hiking through the Indian Himalayas, around Darjeeling and beyond. We travelled on the roofs of trains, slept on wooden beds in remote mountain villages, and rode the white waters down mountain rivers. We also got to explore the spectacular regions of Western Bengal and northern Sikkim, both of which were then restricted zones for tourists due to the border disputes with Pakistan, but for which the Indian Army officer had arranged special permits. We visited the Himalayan Mountaineering Institute outside of Darjeeling, where they ran a winter mountaineering school run by Indian Himalayan guides, and I was hooked. The place was like a shrine to the great mountaineers, and the stories of death and adventure on the highest peaks of earth had me entranced. Meanwhile, Watty had fallen in love with a local Indian girl, which proved a massive distraction to adventure, as far as I could see. He announced he was going off to go and visit her family, but all I wanted to do was hike the mountains in the distant hope of getting to see Everest herself. When I rose early one freezing cold mountain morning, woefully ill-equipped in terms of appropriate clothing, footwear, or sleeping bag, I finally got to watch the sun rise over Everest in the distance, looming like a giant across the horizon. Now, like Watty, I too was in love. On our return to lower altitudes, I bought a large, rolled-up, laminated poster of Everest, which was a bigger version of the one my father had given me when I was a young boy after one of our climbing forays, and I vowed to myself that one day I would risk it all and attempt to climb the biggest, highest mountain on earth. The truth is that at that stage in my life, I had no idea what an expedition would really involve. I had minimal high-altitude experience, and according to all the books, I was far too young to make a serious high-altitude mountaineer. But I had a dream, and that always makes people dangerous. Dreams, though, are cheap, and the real task comes with when you start putting in place the steps needed to make those dreams a reality. I had never been one for idle threats, and I made my Everest intentions clear to all those who were close to me. To a man, they thought I was mad. Before leaving India, I had one more ambition I longed to fulfill. I had always dreamt of meeting Mother Teresa. I discovered that her Mission of Mercy headquarters was based in Calcutta, so we routed by train into the huge, terrifying, sprawling metropolis of one of the world's largest cities, and that alone is an experience. The station was a seething mass of hurrying, scurrying, hustling bodies. It was physically impossible to move faster than a slow shuffle, and you just got taken in whichever direction the crowd was moving. The noise and the smell of feces and sweat was overpowering. There were no other Westerners as far as I could see. Little could have prepared me for what I saw on the squalid streets of Calcutta, beyond the main drag and city centre. I had never seen people dying in a street in front of my eyes before. I had never seen legless, blind, ragged bodies lying in sewers, holding their arms out, begging for a few rupees. I felt overwhelmed, inadequate, powerless, and ashamed all at once. Wattie and I finally found the small hospital and nunnery that was Mother Teresa's mission. Amongst the city of suffering, we had found a haven of love, cleanliness, calm, and care. We returned there every day we were in Calcutta. We gave the remaining notes we had in rupees into her collection box, and I wrote Mother Teresa a folded, handwritten note to say how her work had moved me. I just wanted to thank her and encourage her. I never expected any reply. Knock me down if, 2 months later, I didn't get a personal letter from her saying thank you. I still have it to this day. Believe me when I say that all we gave were a few pounds in total. Her response is called grace, and it amazed me. Her being and her whole way of life, even though we never even met her, was a living, breathing example of God's presence on this earth, and it changed how I saw both myself and the world around me very powerfully. I realised that I had been given privileges beyond those any person could ever hope for, and that we, in return, have a duty of care towards the world and her people. But I wasn't sure yet what this meant for me. I just know that I left the squalor, dirt and suffering of Calcutta with a sense that, in Mother Teresa's life, we had experienced a brush with God that was both beautiful and very real. There is a simple Bible verse, Matthew 23:12, which says, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." This speaks pretty strongly to how I feel about the whole fame issue, and it has coloured so much of what I see in people nowadays. The more I live, the more aware I become of the greatness of the everyday man, and I don't mean this in any sympathetic way. I witness tough people doing tough jobs every day as we travel to the many extremes of the world filming. Maybe it's a lone worker digging a roadside ditch in the middle of the night in the pouring rain on a small jungle track in a remote part of China, or someone more regular, whatever that means, like a coffee vendor in some unsung town in Middle America, just doing the daily grind. Whichever extreme it is, I find myself admiring these people more and more, unsung, uncelebrated, uncomplaining. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. At this stage, I was still a young, wide-eyed pup with bleached blonde, ponytailed hair, freshly home from a hiking trip to India, with the determination to live life to the max.